Hey folks, Matt from artoftheimage.com. Got some great feedback here from YouTube user Citratita. Citratita. I hope I'm saying that right. Anyways, he says this is in regards to the Panasonic G85 versus Sony A6500. 7 reasons to buy the G85 over the Sony A6500 video that I did just a little while back. And he's kind of refuting some of the points I made, which is great. I love to hear your feedback. He says, obviously you have much better knowledge about the features, functions, and lens lineup of Panasonic cameras than Sony ones. You missed many key advantages of Sony systems. So I found this an interesting comment, and he didn't really clarify what he was talking about. So I wrote back and I said, such as. So then Satrita wrote me back and said, better focusing on moving subjects in both photo and video mode on Sony, possibly due to the lack of phase detection focus points on the Panasonic sensor. Much better 4K video quality on Sony, downsized from 6K. Some of the Panasonic features you mentioned can be achieved using Sony apps. Faster frames per second EVF on the Sony side, much bigger buffer on the Sony side. If you are not satisfied with the current Sony APS-C lens lineup, you can consider what Sigma offers for the Sony system and many great quality Sony full frame lenses. And then he's got the IAF in Sony cameras. So, first and foremost here, let's talk about better focus tracking on moving subjects in photo and video mode on Sony. I would disagree. I think that the Panasonic focus system with its DFD system is unmatched in mirrorless cameras. I know Sony claims the latest and greatest every time they put out a camera, fastest autofocus system in the world. I've played with both. The Panasonic is, I believe, the fastest and most accurate. And you can't really state facts on this. You have to shoot them because both companies are claiming the best. I mean, every company out there comes out and says it's the best. So it's not like there's a independent, be-all determination on this from someone. So I would counter your point here and say that I don't agree with you on that. I think the Panasonic has better autofocus system for both photo and video. The only caveat there is that maybe I would give the Sony the better follow focus during video, although the new G85 is killer in that sense. So again, even there, I'm not sure that I would concede that point. The next point you make is much better 4K video on Sony due to the downsizing from 6K. Now, this is one of those situations where, it sounds good. It's a technical spec, and on paper, it does sound good. And I like to look at the specs of things, and then I like to evaluate it in the real world situations and see how it works. And that's where this falls apart for me, because it sounds good, and it sounds like it should be better because it's coming from 6K down to 4K. But in real world terms, the Panasonic 4K video is amazing. Now, I'm not saying the Sony's isn't good. What I'm saying is, I don't think you're going to see any difference at all side by side. I don't think that 6K downsampling is really doing much at all, if anything. I think when you look at two 4K well-shot, well-processed files, not crippling a study so that, one looks bad and one doesn't. But I think if you look at two well-shot files out of the cameras, you're not going to see a single bit of difference between them. I think both 4K systems are very good on Sony and Panasonic. Myself, I prefer the Panasonic because the Sony to me is very unusable because I'm worried about the overheating situation. It's been a fact. I'm not sure that it's still a problem with the A6500, but it certainly was with the 63, and we had issues with the 6. So I don't come away thinking I can shoot the Sony system and not worry about the overheating, which to me makes their 4K unusable. So there's my counterpoint to your 4K. And then talking about some of the Panasonic features being achievable in Sony apps, that's not an argument for the Sony being better than the Panasonic. That's a workaround to try and equal Panasonic using your Sony. So Panasonic's better, they do them in camera. And you're just saying that there's ways that you can do a workaround for the Sony. That's not, okay, Sony's better because we know Sony doesn't have that, but this is how we get around it, okay? So that's not really a point in favor of Sony there at all. It's a point in favor of Panasonic that you made. And then the faster frames per second EVF and much bigger buffer on the Sony side. I've never run into a buffer problem on my Panasonics. So for me and the way I shoot, not an issue. Faster frames per second EVF on the Sony side, the Panasonic EVF is beautiful. Very detailed. I don't run into refresh problems there either. And shooting the two, I would prefer the Panasonic. And to me, the other features of the Panasonic, it doesn't overheat, the full screen vari-angle LCD, the much better menu system, the touch screen, all these things come together for a better shooting experience on the Panasonic side than on the Sony side. The other thing is, you mentioned if you're not satisfied with the current Sony APS-C lens lineup, you can consider what Sigma offers. Well, again, that's not an argument why Sony's better. That's you conceding that they're not and that Panasonic is better. But here's how we work around it. We go to another lens manufacturer because Sony doesn't have a great offering. So it is a good workaround if you want to work in the Sony system. But to me, that's a big flaw in the Sony system. Panasonic has a much stronger, better value, better performing lens lineup for less money, so better value, than Sony does. And Sigma makes some great and Micro Four Thirds lenses too. So that's my counters to your points. But I mean, again, thank you for your feedback, and we can agree to differ on this. And this is what you've done your counterpoints, and I'm debating back with you here. And then we have another viewer feedback in response to that viewer's feedback. Gaetan 4, I tried the A6500 and the touchscreen implementation is horrendous. Very laggy and not very precise too. Also, Sony can't compete with the Panasonic menu system and UI. Sony are just terrible in that regard. So I just mentioned that myself, that I, basically the same thing. I don't like their touchscreen implementation. I think Panasonic's is far better. I think Panasonic's is the best on the market right now for touchscreen implementation and setup. And I would agree as well. The menu system and the user interface are much better on the Panasonics, much more enjoyable to use than on the Sonys. So that is why I would, or I guess not why, that is my counter to your points. And feel free to recounter if you wish. But what do you guys think? Are you a big Sony fan? You disagree with my points? You agree with what our viewer is saying here? Or do you come down more on, like I am, you just prefer the Panasonic system? There's no real right or wrong here. I mean, I've shot both, and I much prefer the Panasonic for these reasons. I'm sure there's people like our viewer here who have shot both and prefer the Sony for their reasons. To me, there are some real deal killers with the Sony, and that's namely, I don't like the lens lineup. The overheating is the biggest thing. I could probably even work around everything else if the overheating didn't bother me. But I also don't like, the no vari-angle LCD, the touchscreen implementation. It all comes together to much prefer the Panasonic for me. But I want to know what you guys think. Leave your comments below. So it's got some good back and forth going here. So everybody's opinion is valid. Just keep it civil. We can agree to disagree. And thanks for your feedback. And stay tuned. We'll be back soon here at artoftheimage.com.